The fever had become a living thing inside her, coiling through her veins like poison, turning the forest path into a shifting nightmare of shadows and half-formed shapes. Vera Nightshade pressed one hand against the rough bark of an oak tree, the other wrapped protectively around the swell of her belly, and tried to remember how to breathe. 8 months. She had survived 8 months of running, of hiding, of sleeping in barns and abandoned cottages, and once, memorably, in the hollow of a fallen tree while winter howled around her. 8 months of watching over her shoulder, of flinching at every unfamiliar scent, of telling herself that tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow had never been better. Keep moving, she told herself, the words worn smooth with repetition. Lily needs you to keep moving. But her legs had stopped listening hours ago. The road before her wavered and doubled, and she couldn't tell anymore if the darkness creeping at the edges of her vision was the approaching night or something far worse. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead despite the chill in the air. Her wolf, usually a steady presence in the back of her mind, had gone terrifyingly silent. 3 years. She had been running for 3 years, ever since the night Drake had stood in their father's council chamber and pointed his finger at her with such conviction that even she had almost believed his lies. "She's been meeting with the Western rebels," he'd said, his voice ringing with righteous fury. "I found letters in her chambers, proof of her betrayal." Vera had watched their father's face transform from confusion to horror to cold, terrible judgment. Alpha Stormborn, who had bounced her on his knee as a child, who had taught her the names of healing herbs in his private garden, who had called her his little moonflower, that man had looked at her like she was something diseased, something to be cut away. "And the poison?" Drake had continued, warming to his performance. "Ask the kitchen staff who's been spending so much time near Father's meals. Ask them who has access to the healer's stores." She had tried to speak, had tried to explain that she'd discovered Drake's own plot, that she'd found the vials hidden in his chambers, that she had proof, but no one would listen. Her own pack had surrounded her with snarling faces and bared teeth, and Drake had smiled at her from behind their father's shoulder with eyes full of triumph. That smile had haunted her dreams ever since. A branch cracked somewhere to her left, and Vera's heart seized. She pushed away from the tree, stumbling forward with desperate determination. The road. She needed to stay on the road. Roads led to villages, and villages meant shelter, and shelter meant... Her foot caught on a root. The ground rushed up to meet her. She managed to twist as she fell, taking the impact on her shoulder rather than her stomach, but the landing still drove the breath from her lungs in a harsh gasp. For a long moment she simply lay there, cheek pressed against the cold earth, watching dead leaves drift past her face in the failing light. Get up. She couldn't. Get up. Lily can't lose you. Not now. Not like this. The thought of her daughter, safe, she hoped, with the midwife in the last village, just for tonight while Vera scouted the road ahead, gave her enough strength to push herself to her hands and knees. The world spun violently. She retched, producing nothing but bile, and the movement sent fresh waves of fire through her aching body. The fever had started 2 days ago. A simple thing, she'd thought at first, exhaustion catching up with her. But it had worsened with terrifying speed, and now she could feel it consuming her from the inside out, burning through whatever reserves she had left. She needed water, rest, the herbs she'd used on so many others during her years as a traveling healer. Instead, she was alone on a forest road in territory she didn't know, with night falling and her body failing, and no one in the world who would mourn if she simply closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. No, not no one. Lily would mourn. Lily, with her father's dark hair and her mother's gray eyes, who had never done anything to deserve a life spent running, who had learned to walk in a stranger's barn and spoken her first words in a language Vera barely knew, who called every temporary shelter home because she had never known what the word really meant. Vera had written a letter once, in those first desperate weeks after her escape. She had addressed it to the Alpha King himself, to Magnus Blackwood, whose reputation for justice had reached even her small pack's territory. She had poured her whole story onto that page, the false accusations, the planted evidence, her brother's treachery, and had begged for sanctuary. She had never received a response. The letter had probably never even reached him. Why would the most powerful alpha in the realm care about the troubles of a disgraced healer from a minor pack? But she had hoped. In her weakest moments, alone in the dark, she had let herself imagine a world where someone believed her, where someone came to help. No one had come. Vera dragged herself forward another few feet, her fingers digging into the cold earth. The trees here were older, larger, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the last of the fading light. She couldn't see the road anymore, couldn't tell which direction she'd been heading. Her thoughts were fragmenting, scattering like startled birds. And through the haze of fever she heard something that might have been hoofbeats, or might have been her own pulse, thundering in her ears as her body finally surrendered. Lily, she thought, and the name felt like a prayer. I'm sorry, little one. I'm so sorry. The hoofbeats grew louder. Voices filtered through the darkness, male voices sharp with alarm. There's someone on the road. Is that blood? Check if she's breathing. Hands touched her shoulders. Vera tried to flinch away, tried to summon enough strength to run or fight or do anything at all. But her body had finally stopped pretending it could continue. The fever crashed over her like a wave, dragging her down into darkness, and her last conscious sensation was being lifted by arms that felt impossibly strong. The hunters found her just past the border marker, where Alpha King's territory began. Later, they would tell the story in taverns and around fires. The pregnant woman who had appeared on the forest road like a ghost, her clothes threadbare and her feet bloody, and her face burning with fever. They would speak of how light she'd been when they lifted her, as if she'd been starving herself to keep her unborn child fed. They would wonder, as soldiers often do, about what kind of life could have brought her to such a state. They did not know who she was. They did not recognize the name she whispered in her delirium. Lily, please, I have to get back to Lily, as anything significant. They only knew that she needed help, and that their king had standing orders to bring any travelers in distress directly to the palace healers. So they wrapped her in their cloaks and turned their horses toward home, carrying Vera Nightshade into the one place she had given up hoping to reach. Miles behind them, in a small village on the edge of nowhere, a 2-year-old girl with dark hair and gray eyes woke in the midwife's cottage and began to cry for her mother. The palace rose from the mountain like something grown rather than built, its towers catching the last light of sunset until they seemed to burn with inner fire. Vera saw none of it. She drifted through fever dreams, through memories that cut like broken glass. Drake's smile, her father's condemnation, the long and lonely road that had become her life. Sometimes she surfaced enough to register fragments. A warm room, soft sheets against her skin, voices speaking in hushed tones, hands that touched her with careful competence, checking her pulse, pressing cool cloths to her forehead. Once, she thought she heard someone say the word mate, but the fever pulled her back down before she could make sense of it. She woke fully for the first time to the sight of a man sitting in a chair beside her bed. He was large. That was her first drowsy thought. Even seated, he seemed to fill the room with his presence, broad shoulders casting shadows in the candlelight. His hair was dark, falling across his forehead in a way that suggested he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. His face was all harsh angles and sharp lines, the face of a man who had seen war and won. But his eyes, when they met hers, held something she hadn't expected. They held worry. "You're awake," he said, and his voice was low and rough, as if he hadn't spoken in hours. "Thank the gods, you're awake." Vera opened her mouth to ask where she was, who he was, what had happened. But before she could form a single word, warmth flooded her chest like sunlight breaking through clouds. Her wolf, silent for so long she had almost forgotten what it felt like, surged against her skin with a howl that seemed to shake her very bones. "Mate." The man went rigid. His eyes bled to pure gold, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. Not threatening, but something far more primal. Recognition. Claiming. "It's you," he breathed, and his voice cracked on the words. "3 years I searched, and fate brings you to my door." Vera stared at him, her mind reeling with terror and desperate hope in equal measure. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, to the child she carried, and then, "Lily. Where was Lily?" "My daughter," she rasped, and her voice sounded like gravel. "I left her. The village. I have to." "She's here." The man, the Alpha King, she realized with dawning shock, because those gold eyes and that unmistakable presence could belong to no one else, leaned forward, and his expression softened into something almost tender. "My men found her this morning. She's with the palace healers, safe and sound." He paused, and she saw his throat work as he swallowed. "She asked for you. She's been asking for you all day." Relief hit her so hard she nearly sobbed. Lily was safe. Lily was here, in the palace, away from the road and the cold and the endless running. Whatever happened now, whatever this strange new complication meant, at least her daughter was safe. "You," she managed, still trying to make sense of everything. "You're Magnus Blackwood." He said it like a confession, like something he was offering up for her judgment. "And you're Vera Nightshade, the woman who wrote to me 3 years ago, begging for sanctuary." His hand moved to his chest, pressing against the fabric of his shirt, and something crinkled beneath his palm. "I've carried your letter every day since, searching, hoping." He kept it. The thought was too large to process, too impossible to believe. "He kept my letter for 3 years." "I thought you never received it," she whispered. Magnus's eyes burned with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I received it 6 weeks after you sent it. By the time I reached your pack's territory, you had vanished. Your father believed you guilty. Your brother said you had fled to escape justice, and no one could tell me where you had gone." His voice roughened with old frustration, old grief. "I've had men searching for you ever since. Every rumor of a gray-eyed healer, every whisper of a woman traveling alone. I followed them all. And now you're here, in my palace, and you're—" He stopped, his gaze dropping to the curve of her belly, and something flickered across his face that she couldn't read. "The child," he said carefully. "Is it not his?" The words came out sharper than she intended, defensive and raw. "I was already pregnant when I fled. The father was a traitor who passed through our territory. He died before I could tell him, and my brother used it as more evidence against me." She laughed bitterly. "A healer who couldn't keep herself unmated. Further proof of my corruption." Magnus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle in a way that made her chest ache. "You're safe now," he said. "You and your daughter and the child you carry. Whatever your brother accused you of, whatever your pack believes, none of it matters here. You are under my protection, Vera. No one will hurt you again." She wanted to believe him. Goddess. How she wanted to believe him. But 3 years of running had taught her that safety was an illusion, that promises meant nothing when power shifted and loyalties changed. And yet, the bond between them pulsed with warmth, with certainty, with something that felt terrifyingly like coming home. Her wolf pressed against her skin, desperate to be closer to him, and she had to fight the urge to reach out and touch his face, to see if he was real. "Why?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Why did you search for me? You didn't even know me." Magnus's expression shifted, and for just a moment, the ruthless Alpha King disappeared. In his place was simply a man, tired and lonely, and carrying a weight she couldn't begin to understand. "Because your letter was the first thing in a century that made me feel something," he said quietly. "Because you asked for help, and I failed to give it. And because—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "Because you're my mate," he finished, and the words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. I didn't know it then, but I knew something had changed. Something had shifted, and I couldn't rest until I found you." Vera stared at him, this impossibly powerful man who had spent 3 years searching for a woman he'd never met, carrying her desperate letter next to his heart. She should be afraid. She knew she should be afraid. But all she felt, looking into those golden eyes, was the first fragile stirring of hope she'd allowed herself in years. "I don't know how to trust anymore," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Magnus nodded slowly, as if this was exactly what he had expected to hear. "Then let me earn it," he said. "However long it takes, whatever you need. I've waited 3 years to find you, Vera. I can wait a little longer for you to believe in me." Through the bond, she felt the truth of his words like a physical thing, solid and unwavering and achingly sincere. And despite everything, despite 3 years of running and hiding and learning that the world was cruel and mercy was rare, Vera found herself wanting to let him try. The silence stretched between them, fragile and charged, and Vera found she couldn't look away from those golden eyes. The bond pulsed in her chest like a second heartbeat, warm and insistent. And her wolf. Her wolf who had been dormant for so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to share her skin, pressed forward with desperate hunger. Mate. Ours. Safe. She wanted to believe it. The wanting was almost physical, a hollow ache behind her ribs that had nothing to do with the fever still lingering in her limbs. But 3 years of survival had taught her that wanting was dangerous. Wanting made you careless. Wanting got you caught. I should... She tried to push herself upright, but her arms trembled with the effort, and the room tilted dangerously. "Lily, I need to see her." Magnus was on his feet before she could blink, one large hand pressing gently against her shoulder. "Easy. The healers say you're not to move yet. The fever nearly killed you." "I don't care about the fever." Her voice came out sharper than she intended, edged with the panic that had become her constant companion. "I need to see my daughter. I need to know she's really here, that she's safe. That she's safe." His hand remained on her shoulder, warm even through the thin fabric of the shift someone had dressed her in. "I swear it on my blood, on my throne, on whatever you need me to swear it on." She's 2 floors below us in the healer's wing, probably terrorizing the staff with questions about every herb and poultice in sight. Despite herself, Vera felt her lips twitch. That sounded like Lily. Even at 2, her daughter had inherited Vera's curiosity about the healing arts, forever asking what's that and why and can I touch it. "She takes after you," Magnus said softly, and she realized he'd been watching her face, reading her expressions. "The healers said she kept trying to help them prepare your medicines. Apparently she has very strong opinions about the proper way to crush feverfew." A sound escaped Vera's throat, half laugh, half sob. "She watched me work, in the villages. She always wanted to help. Then she'll be glad to know her mother is awake and asking for her." Magnus straightened, and something shifted in his expression. The tender openness faded, replaced by something more formal, more careful. "I'll have her brought to you. But first, You need to eat something. And the healers need to check your fever. And he trailed off, his jaw working as if he was struggling with something. And, Vera prompted, her wariness returning. And we need to talk about what happens now, about your brother and your pack, and the accusations against you. His eyes met hers, and she saw the ruthless Alpha King surface beneath the gentleness. I need to know everything, Vera. Not because I doubt you. I've never doubted you. Not since I read your letter. But because if I'm going to protect you, I need to know what I'm protecting you from. The words protect you sent another pulse of warmth through the bond, and Vera had to fight to keep her expression neutral. He said it so easily, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As if protecting a stranger, mate or not, was simply what one did. No one had protected her in 3 years. No one had even tried. Drake will come for me, she heard herself say. When he learns I'm here, he can't afford to let me live. I know too much about what he did. Then let him come. Magnus's voice dropped to a low growl that made something primal shiver down her spine. Let him walk into my territory and try to take what's mine. What's mine? Vera's wolf surged at the words, pressing so hard against her skin that she gasped. Heat flooded through her, starting in her chest and spreading outward until her fingertips tingled with it. The mate bond, which had been a gentle warmth, suddenly blazed like fire. Magnus went still. His nostrils flared, and his eyes, already golden, seemed to burn brighter. The growl that rumbled from his chest was deeper now, resonating in her bones. Vera. Her name was a rasp, almost a warning. Your scent just... I need to... He took a step back from the bed, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. She watched the muscles in his jaw flex as he fought for control, and she realized with sudden clarity what was happening. He was fighting the mate bond, fighting the instinct that demanded he claim her, mark her, make the bond permanent. Fighting it because she was vulnerable and fevered and had given no indication that she wanted any of this. 3 years ago, she had been a healer in a pack, where unmated males took what they wanted and called it their right. She had watched her packmates corner women, had treated the aftermath, had learned to keep her head down and pray she never caught anyone's attention. This man, this Alpha King with the power to take anything he wanted, was backing away, giving her space, putting her needs above his instincts. The realization cracked something open in her chest. You're fighting it, she said quietly. The bond. You're fighting it. Magnus's laugh was strained. I've been fighting it since I walked into this room and caught your scent. It's been... He shook his head, another rough sound escaping him. 3 years, Vera. 3 years of searching, of hoping, of carrying that letter and wondering if you were even alive. And now you're here, and every instinct I have is screaming at me to... He cut himself off, turning away from her. His shoulders rose and fell with controlled breaths. But you don't know me, he continued, his voice steadier now. You have no reason to trust me, and I will not be another thing that happens to you without your consent. Not ever. Vera stared at his back, at the tension coiled in every line of his body, and felt something shift in her perception of him. He was not just powerful. He was not just her mate. He was a man who understood what it meant to be powerless, even if he had never experienced it himself. Thank you, she whispered. Magnus turned, surprise flickering across his features. For what? For giving me a choice. She held his gaze, trying to convey everything she couldn't put into words. No one has given me a choice in a very long time. Something passed between them, an understanding, a promise. The bond hummed with it, settling from its frantic pulse into something calmer, still present, still powerful, but no longer demanding. I'll have Lily brought to you, Magnus said, his voice rough. And food. And then I'll leave you to rest. Tomorrow, when you're stronger, we'll talk about everything else. He moved toward the door, and Vera found herself speaking before she could stop herself. Magnus. He turned, one hand on the door frame. The letter, she said. You really kept it? All this time? His hand moved to his chest again, pressing against that spot where she'd heard paper crinkle. When he drew his hand away, he was holding a folded piece of parchment, creased and worn, the edges soft from handling. I've read it so many times I have it memorized, he said quietly. Every word, every plea, every description of what they did to you. His eyes met hers, and she saw something fierce burning in their depths. I made you a promise when I read this letter, Vera. I swore that if I ever found you, I would make them pay for what they'd done. I intend to keep that promise. He was gone before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him, leaving her alone with the echo of his words and the warmth of the bond still humming in her chest. Vera lay back against the pillows, her mind spinning. Less than a day ago, she had been dying on a forest road, convinced that her story would end in darkness. Now she was in the Alpha King's palace, her daughter safe, her mate found, and the man who had hunted her for 3 years waiting just beyond the door. It was too much. All of it. Too much. But beneath the fear and the confusion and the bone-deep exhaustion, something else stirred. Hope. Fragile and terrifying and completely irrational hope. She didn't know how to trust anymore. She had told him that, and it was true. But watching him fight his own instincts for her sake, watching him hold her letter like it was something precious, watching him promise vengeance for wrongs she had almost stopped believing anyone cared about. Maybe she could learn. The door opened again 20 minutes later, and Vera's heart stopped. Magnus entered first, moving with that careful grace that seemed impossible for a man his size, but it was what he carried that made her breath catch in her throat. Lily was asleep against his shoulder, one small hand fisted in the fabric of his shirt. Her dark hair was freshly washed and braided, clumsily, as if someone had tried their best with unfamiliar fingers. Her cheeks were flushed with healthy color, and she wore a soft nightgown that was clearly made for a child of noble birth. She fell asleep about an hour ago, Magnus said quietly, his voice pitched low to avoid waking her. The healers said she'd been fighting it for hours, insisting she needed to stay awake until she could see you. But eventually... He trailed off, looking down at the sleeping child with an expression that made Vera's chest ache. The ruthless Alpha King was holding her daughter like she was made of glass, like she was something infinitely precious, like he understood, on some bone-deep level, what this child meant to the woman in his bed. I tried to put her in the nursery, he continued, moving toward the bed. But she started crying and asking for her mama, and A rueful smile crossed his face. I may be able to command armies, but I am utterly helpless against a crying 2-year-old. He settled Lily onto the bed beside Vera, careful not to jostle her. The little girl immediately curled toward her mother's warmth, one hand reaching out to grab a fistful of Vera's shift. Mama, she mumbled, still mostly asleep. Found you. Vera gathered her daughter close, pressing her face into Lily's hair and breathing in the familiar scent of her. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She couldn't stop them, didn't even try. For 3 years she had lived in terror of losing this. For 3 years she had wondered if the next night would be the one where she wasn't fast enough, wasn't careful enough, wasn't strong enough. And now Lily was here, safe in her arms, wearing fine clothes and smelling of soap, and sleeping the peaceful sleep of a child who had never known fear. When Vera looked up, Magnus was watching them with an expression that made her heart stutter. Longing. Raw, undisguised longing. He wanted this, she realized. Not just her, though the bond made that clear enough. He wanted the family, the child, the connection. He had been alone for a very long time. Stay, she heard herself say, the word escaping before she could call it back. Magnus went still. What? Just. She struggled to articulate what she meant, what she was offering. The chair. You can, if you want to. He should have been smug about it. Should have shown some triumph at her invitation, however small. Instead, he just nodded, his expression carefully neutral, and settled back into the chair he'd occupied during his vigil. Sleep, he said quietly. I'll keep watch. And somehow, impossibly, Vera believed him. She slept. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of recovery and revelation. Vera's fever broke fully on the second day, and by the third, she was strong enough to sit up and take proper meals. Lily, delighted to have her mother conscious and responsive, chattered endlessly about everything she'd seen and done and eaten since arriving at the palace. They have honey cakes, Mama, with little flowers on top. And the healer lady let me help make the sticky stuff. She said I was very good at crushing things. And there are so many books. And the Alpha King says he'll teach me to read when I'm older and… Magnus, who had continued his vigil despite Vera's attempts to send him away, listened to this stream of consciousness with an expression of bemused fascination. You promised to teach her to read? Vera asked, raising an eyebrow. She asked. Magnus shrugged, as if making promises to toddlers was perfectly normal behavior for an Alpha King. She said her mother reads to her every night, but the books are hard to find and sometimes they get lost when you move. I mentioned that I have a rather extensive library. You mentioned. I may have also shown her the children's section and demonstrated how to turn pages without tearing them. She's a very apt pupil. Vera stared at him, trying to reconcile the fearsome reputation of Magnus Blackwood with the man who was apparently spending his spare time giving library tours to a 2-year-old. You don't have to do this, she said finally. Any of this. The room, the clothes, the reading lessons. I know the bond creates certain expectations, but you don't owe us anything. Magnus's expression flickered, and for a moment she saw something wounded beneath the careful composure. Is that what you think this is? He asked quietly. Obligation? I don't know what this is. The honesty cost her, but she forced herself to continue. I don't know you. I don't know what you want from me. And in my experience, when powerful men give things freely, there's always a price. She expected him to be offended, to show the famous Blackwood temper that she'd heard whispers about during her years of running. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if her words confirmed something he'd already known. You're right to be wary, he said. The world has taught you that, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I'm going to prove you wrong, Vera. However long it takes. Whatever I need to do. He leaned forward, his eyes holding hers. Ask the servants about me. Ask the guards. Ask anyone in this palace what kind of man I am. I won't hide anything from you. Every report, every record, every story, it's yours to examine. And if I don't like what I find, then you can leave. The words seemed to cost him something, but his voice remained steady. I won't keep you here against your will. I won't use the bond as a cage. If you decide that you don't want this, don't want me, I'll give you enough gold to start a new life somewhere safe, and I'll never trouble you again. Vera searched his face for the lie, for the manipulation, for the catch that she knew must be hiding somewhere beneath those golden eyes. She found nothing but sincerity. The bond pulsed between them, and for the first time, she let herself acknowledge what it was telling her. Not just attraction, though there was that too, humming beneath her skin whenever he came near. Something deeper, something that felt like recognition, like coming home to a place she'd never been. The library, she said finally. You mentioned a children's section. Magnus's expression lightened, a hint of hope breaking through the careful neutrality. 3rd floor, east wing, floor-to-ceiling windows and a ridiculous number of cushions. Lily has already claimed a spot by the fireplace as her personal reading nook. Show me. It was a small thing, a single step toward trust in a journey that would take far longer than either of them probably realized. But when Magnus smiled, really smiled, the expression transforming his harsh features into something almost beautiful, Vera felt the first crack in the walls she'd built around her heart. Maybe, she thought, maybe, it wasn't much, but it was a start. The library exceeded every expectation Vera had allowed herself to form. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows Magnus had described, casting warm golden rectangles across polished wooden floors. Bookshelves stretched toward vaulted ceilings, their dark wood carved with running wolves and crescent moons. The scent of old paper and leather binding wrapped around her like a familiar embrace, and Vera found herself stopping just inside the doorway, overwhelmed by the sheer abundance of it. 3 years of running. 3 years of losing every possession she'd managed to accumulate, of watching her small collection of healing texts vanish to fire or flood, or the simple necessity of traveling light. And here stood more books than she could read in a lifetime, preserved and protected and freely offered. The children's section is through here, Magnus said, his voice soft as if he understood what this meant to her. He guided her through the stacks with a light touch at the small of her back, the contact sending warmth spreading through her despite the layers of fabric between them. Lily's reading nook came into view, a bay window with cushions piled high, a small wooden table just the right height for a 2-year-old, and a stack of picture books with worn spines that spoke of frequent handling. Lily herself sat cross-legged on the largest cushion, a book open in her lap that was clearly too advanced for her, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration. "Mama!" She scrambled up when she spotted them, the book falling forgotten as she launched herself toward Vera. "Magnus showed me the pictures of the wolves, the big ones that turn into people." Vera caught her daughter and swung her up, pressing a kiss to her dark hair. "Did he now? He said I could be a wolf too when I'm bigger. Can I, Mama? Can I turn into a wolf like you?" The question pierced something tender in Vera's chest. She hadn't shifted in 3 years, hadn't dared to let her wolf fully emerge when stealth and human disguise were all that kept them alive. Lily had never seen her mother's other form, had only heard stories whispered in the dark about the wolves their family descended from. "When you're older," Vera promised, her voice thick, "we'll run through the forest together." Lily's face lit up with pure joy, and Vera felt Magnus's gaze on her like a physical weight. When she glanced at him, she found something fierce and protective burning in his golden eyes, an alpha's response to a child's happiness, perhaps, or something more personal that she wasn't ready to examine. The afternoon passed in a haze of picture books and warm sunlight. Magnus sat with them, his large frame somehow folding comfortably into the window seat, reading aloud in a voice that made the characters come alive. Lily crawled into his lap without hesitation, her small body trusting in a way that made Vera's throat ache. When had her daughter last known safety? When had either of them? Evening brought a quiet dinner in Vera's chambers, her strength still recovering, though she could walk without exhaustion now. Lily fell asleep mid-sentence, her head pillowed on Magnus's shoulder as he carried her to the small bed that had been set up in the adjoining room. "She does that," Vera said softly, watching him tuck the blankets around her daughter with surprising gentleness. "Falls asleep, wherever she feels safe. Then I'll count myself honored." Magnus straightened, his expression unreadable in the candlelight. "Vera, there's something I need to tell you." The shift in his tone sent ice through her veins. She'd been waiting for this, the other shoe dropping, the price revealed. "What is it?" "An embassy arrived this afternoon, from the Northern Territories." He paused, and she watched his jaw tighten. "Your brother Drake leads it." The room tilted. Vera reached for the bedpost, her knuckles going white as the world narrowed to a single terrible point. Drake. Here. After 3 years of running, of hiding, of building a fragile safety that she'd barely begun to trust, her brother had found her. He claims to seek alliance negotiations, Magnus continued, his voice hardening. But I recognized the name immediately. I know what he did to you, Vera. What he accused you of. You can't. She forced the words past the terror closing her throat. You can't let him know I'm here. He'll kill me. He'll kill Lily. Magnus moved toward her, and she flinched before she could stop herself. He froze, pain flashing across his features, but he didn't reach for her. Listen to me. His voice dropped to something low and fierce. Drake Stormborn will not touch you. He will not touch your daughter. If he so much as looks at either of you wrong, I will tear out his throat with my bare hands. You don't understand. The words tumbled out, fear stripping away all her careful composure. He framed me, Magnus. He poisoned our father himself and blamed me, and everyone believed him because I was pregnant and unwed and he'd spent months laying the groundwork. He can't afford to let me live. I know too much about what he did. Then we'll expose him? Magnus's golden eyes blazed. We'll prove his guilt before the assembled packs. With what evidence? I had evidence 3 years ago. Vials I found in his chambers, correspondence with his co-conspirators, and no one listened. He's had years to cover his tracks. He's also had years to grow arrogant. Magnus stepped closer, and this time, Vera didn't flinch. Arrogance makes men careless. We'll find proof, and we'll destroy him. Why? The question burst from her before she could stop it. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. Magnus reached into his jacket and withdrew a piece of paper, worn soft at the edges from constant handling. She recognized it instantly, her own handwriting, the desperate plea she'd written 3 years ago when she'd had nothing left to lose. I've read this letter every day since it reached me, he said quietly. Every single day. I memorized each word while my men searched every corner of my kingdom for you. I know what they did to you, Vera. What he let happen to you in your father's pack. The unmated males who... Don't. Her voice cracked. Please don't. He tucked the letter away, his expression gentling. I failed to find you in time to spare you those 3 years. I won't fail you again. The bond pulsed between them, warm and steady, and Vera felt tears burning behind her eyes. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so desperately that the longing felt like a physical ache in her chest. The embassy dinner is tomorrow evening, Magnus said. I'll arrange for you to stay hidden. Drake won't even know you're in the palace. No. The word surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. No. I'm tired of hiding. I've spent 3 years running from him, living in fear of his shadow. If he's here, I want to see him. I want to know what he's planning. Magnus studied her face for a long moment. That's dangerous. Everything is dangerous. At least this way, I have some control. A slow smile curved his lips, proud almost. Very well, but you'll stay close to me. And if he makes any move toward you, you'll tear out his throat. Yes, I heard you. The smile widened, and Vera felt an answering warmth kindle in her chest despite the fear still churning in her stomach. Magnus took his leave shortly after, and Vera spent a restless night listening to Lily's soft breathing, her mind racing through scenarios and contingencies. By morning, she'd made a decision. If Drake wanted to play political games, she would match him move for move. But this time, she wouldn't be alone. The embassy dinner filled the great hall with glittering nobles and the scent of roasted meat. Vera descended the stairs on Magnus's arm, wearing a gown of deep green silk that the servants had produced seemingly from nowhere. Her hair had been arranged in an elaborate style that hid the thin scar at her hairline, a souvenir from her flight through the mountain pass 3 years ago. She spotted Drake immediately. Her brother stood near the high table, holding court among a cluster of northern nobles. He'd grown leaner in the years since she'd seen him, his features sharpening into something that might have been handsome if she hadn't known the rot beneath the surface. When his gaze swept the room and found her, his expression froze for one telling instant before smooth diplomacy slid back into place. "Steady," Magnus murmured, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. "I'm fine." She wasn't. Her heart was racing, her wolf pressing against her skin for the first time in years, demanding she either fight or flee. But she kept her spine straight and her expression serene as Magnus guided her to the high table. Drake approached before the first course was served. "Alpha King." He bowed with precise courtesy, his eyes never leaving Vera's face. "What an unexpected pleasure. I didn't realize you'd acquired such charming company." "Lady Vera is my honored guest." Magnus's voice carried clearly through the hall, and Vera saw several nobles exchange glances at the emphasis on her title. "Any insult to her is treason against the crown." Drake's smile didn't waver. "Insult? I would never dream of it. Though I confess myself curious. Last I heard of my dear sister, she'd fled our family pack under rather unfortunate circumstances." "False accusations, as I understand it." Magnus's tone could have frozen fire. "Made by someone with their own agenda." "Is that what she told you?" Drake's laugh was light, dismissive. Poor Vera. She always did have trouble separating fantasy from reality. The pregnancy alone was proof enough of her corruption, spreading her legs for a common traitor while betrothed to one of our father's allies. The hall went silent. Vera felt rather than saw Magnus start to rise, his power flooding the room with crushing pressure that made lesser wolves duck their heads in instinctive submission. "Magnus." She laid her hand on his arm, and the pressure eased slightly. "He wants you to lose your temper. Don't give him the satisfaction." Her brother's eyes widened fractionally. He hadn't expected her to speak, she realized. Hadn't expected the girl who'd fled in terror to have found any semblance of spine. "The truth will emerge," she said, and her voice didn't shake. "It always does." Drake leaned closer under the pretense of reaching for a wine glass, and his whisper was pitched for her ears alone. "I know you found my vials, little sister, and I know you have no proof. Fall on my mercy tomorrow morning, confess to your crimes, and I'll make your death quick. Resist, and I'll make you watch while I kill your bastard daughter first." Ice flooded her veins, but she held his gaze without flinching. "Try it," she whispered back, "and discover exactly what happens to those who threaten what's mine." Drake's mask cracked, just for an instant, revealing the monster she remembered. Then the smooth diplomat returned, and he swept away to charm other nobles while Vera sat perfectly still, her hands steady on the table despite the terror screaming through every nerve. She had until morning, and somewhere between the first course and the last, watching Magnus deflect political maneuvering with deadly grace while keeping her constantly in his peripheral vision, Vera began to form a plan. Later that night, after the dinner had concluded and the nobles had retired to their chambers, Magnus found her in the library. Lily slept in the adjoining room, watched over by a trusted guard, and Vera stood at the window overlooking the moonlit gardens. "He threatened her." Magnus's voice was rough. "I could smell the fear on you when he leaned close. He said he'd kill her if I didn't confess tomorrow morning." Vera didn't turn around. "He thinks I have no proof. No allies. That I'm the same frightened girl who ran away 3 years ago." "Vera." "But he made a mistake tonight." She turned then, and Magnus went still at whatever he saw in her expression. "When he leaned toward me, I slipped my hand into his pocket. Old habits from 3 years of surviving on scraps and stolen supplies." She held up a small ring, gold, with a hollow compartment cleverly hidden in the design. "This residue inside," she continued, "is the same compound used to poison my father. Drake kept it close because he never could resist keeping trophies. I couldn't prove anything 3 years ago because my evidence disappeared. But this, She closed her fist around the ring. This I can prove. Healer's training. I know exactly what's in this compound and how to demonstrate it. Magnus crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands coming up to cup her face. You brilliant, impossible woman. There's a truth fire ceremony. The old ways. No wolf can lie through it. She met his eyes, drawing strength from the fierce pride she saw there. If I demand it formally, Drake can't refuse without admitting guilt. It's dangerous. If something goes wrong, then at least I'll have tried. She turned her face into his palm, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability. I'm done running, Magnus. I'm done being afraid. He took everything from me once. I won't let him do it again. Magnus's thumb traced her cheekbone, and the bond between them pulsed with warmth she was only beginning to understand. Then we'll fight, he said simply. Together. The word settled into her chest like a promise. Together. She'd been alone so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone standing with her. But now, watching moonlight paint silver across Magnus's harsh features, feeling the steady pulse of the bond connecting them, Vera allowed herself to believe that maybe, she wouldn't have to face the darkness alone anymore. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation she'd been running from for 3 years, but tonight, standing in a moonlit library with her mate's warmth anchoring her, Vera Nightshade finally stopped running and started planning how to destroy the brother who had taken everything from her. The tribunal convened at dawn. Vera had not slept. She'd spent the remaining hours of darkness preparing, reviewing the compound residue in Drake's ring, rehearsing the formal words required to invoke the truth fire ceremony, and holding Lily close while her daughter slumbered peacefully, unaware of the storm about to break. Now she stood at the entrance to the great hall, her heart hammering against her ribs as she surveyed the assembled alphas. Magnus had summoned them at first light. Every pack leader within a day's ride, every noble with authority to bear witness. The hall was packed with wolves of power and influence, their eyes sharp with curiosity and barely concealed hunger for drama. Drake stood near the dais, flanked by his northern guards. He wore ceremonial robes that made him look almost regal, and his expression radiated wounded dignity. The performance had already begun. The accused has arrived, he announced, his voice carrying through the hall. My sister, who fled justice 3 years ago, who poisoned our father and consorted with rebels, who now seeks to hide behind the Alpha King's protection rather than face her crimes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vera felt their gazes like physical weight, judging, assessing, many already inclined to believe the polished diplomat over the disgraced healer. Magnus appeared at her side, his presence solid and reassuring. You don't have to do this alone. Yes, I do. She met his eyes, drawing strength from the fierce pride she saw there. If you defend me, they'll say I manipulated you, that I used the mate bond to cloud your judgment. I have to stand on my own, or no one will believe the truth. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. I'll be right here. Vera stepped forward into the hall. The crowd parted before her, and she walked with her spine straight and her head high, refusing to cower before their scrutiny. 3 years ago, she had fled this kind of attention, certain that no one would listen, that the truth couldn't compete with Drake's carefully constructed lies. She wasn't that girl anymore. I claim the right of formal response, she announced, her voice ringing clear through the sudden silence. Before this assembly of alphas, I demand the opportunity to answer my accuser's charges. Drake's smile flickered, just for an instant, before smoothing back into benevolent patience. Of course, dear sister, though I fear your silver tongue won't save you this time. I have documented evidence, sealed testimonies. Then you won't object to the truth fire. The words dropped into the hall like stones into still water. Vera watched the ripples spread through the assembled wolves. Shock, intrigue, and in Drake's eyes, the first crack in his careful composure. The truth fire, she continued, is the old way, the sacred way. No wolf can lie through its flames. I invoke it now, before these witnesses, and challenge my accuser to do the same. Drake's mask slipped further. That ceremony hasn't been used in generations. Are you refusing? Vera stepped closer, her voice soft but carrying. The brother who claims such certainty in my guilt, who has pursued me for 3 years in the name of justice. Surely you have nothing to fear from the truth. Silence stretched through the hall. Every eye fixed on Drake, waiting for his response. His hand moved, just a fraction, toward his belt, where Vera knew he kept his hidden blade. Then he seemed to remember where he was, and his expression smoothed into reluctant acceptance. Very well, he said. If my sister insists on humiliating herself with outdated rituals, I won't deny her. Prepare the truth fire. The ceremony took an hour to arrange. Ancient braziers were dragged from storage and filled with sacred herbs. An elder wolf, one of the few remaining who remembered the old ways, was summoned to officiate. The hall filled with thick smoke that carried a scent like pine and lightning, and Vera felt her wolf press against her skin, responding to power that predated the political games of modern packs. When the flames burned green, the color of truth, the elder announced, Vera stepped forward first. I am Vera Nightshade, she declared, daughter of Alpha Stormborn. I swear before this assembly and these sacred flames that I did not poison my father. I did not conspire with rebels. I was falsely accused by my brother Drake, who sought to hide his own crimes by destroying me. The flames burned steady and true, casting emerald light across her face. No flicker, no darkening. The ancient magic confirmed her words as honest. A murmur swept through the crowd. Now, Vera said, turning to face Drake, let my accuser speak his truth. Drake's composure had crumbled entirely. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his eyes darted toward the exits, calculating, desperate. This is absurd. I don't have to subject myself to— You invoked justice, Magnus said, his voice cutting through Drake's protests like a blade. You demanded your sister be returned to face trial. Now she offers you the very proof you claim to want. His eyes burned gold in the firelight. Unless you'd rather admit that your accusations were lies. Drake's hand moved. Too fast for conscious thought, he drew the blade from his belt and lunged toward Vera, his face twisted with fury that finally matched the monster beneath his mask. You should have stayed dead, he snarled. Vera didn't flinch. She'd known this moment would come, had prepared for it through all those sleepless hours, drawing on 3 years of survival and the healer's training that had always been her greatest weapon. As Drake's blade descended, she spoke the binding words her mother had taught her in secret. The legacy of a bloodline she'd hidden her entire life. Power surged through her veins, ancient and terrible. Drake froze mid-strike, his body locked in place by invisible bonds. The blade trembled inches from Vera's throat, but it could move no further. His eyes bulged with shock and rage, his wolf howling against the restraint. You, he choked. That's impossible. Mother never— Mother taught me everything, Vera said quietly. She knew what you would become even then. She made me promise to keep it hidden, to never reveal what I could do. She stepped closer, watching fear finally dawn in her brother's eyes. You took everything from me, my home, my family, my name. You hunted me for 3 years while I raised my daughter in borrowed rooms and empty barns. She held up the gold ring, his ring, with its hidden compartment of poison residue. This compound matches exactly what was found in our father's body, she announced to the assembly. I've analyzed it with a healer's precision, the same blend of wolfsbane and nightshade, the same proportions, the same signature traces of northern mountain soil where these particular plants grow. She met the eyes of the assembled alphas, one by one. My brother kept the evidence of his crime as a trophy. His own arrogance condemned him. The truth fire blazed brighter, confirming every word. Drake struggled against the binding, his voice rising to a desperate howl. She's lying. It's a trick. She must have planted the ring somehow. The flames say otherwise, the elder wolf intoned. The old magic does not lie, young Alpha. Your guilt is confirmed before witnesses and gods alike. Vera stepped back, releasing the binding. Drake collapsed to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. For a moment he simply knelt there, and Vera saw the boy she remembered. The brother who had once taught her to climb trees, who had bandaged her scraped knees, who had promised to always protect her. That boy had died long ago. The man who remained was nothing but poison and ambition. You took everything from me, she said again, and this time her voice didn't waver. Now watch me take it back. Magnus stepped forward, his presence filling the hall with crushing authority. Drake Stormborn, you stand convicted of attempted murder, of treason against your own blood, and of perjury before this assembly. The sentence is death. Drake's head snapped up. You can't. I'm an ambassador. My pack will declare war. Your pack has already been informed of your crimes, Magnus interrupted. The evidence was dispatched last night. Your father recovers slowly, but he lives, and he has renounced you as his heir. Something shattered behind Drake's eyes. The last of his composure, the last of his schemes, crumbling to nothing. This isn't over, he spat. She's a witch. That power she used, she's corrupted you with her mate bond. Magnus's blade sang free of its sheath. One strike, clean and precise, and Drake Stormborn fell silent forever. Vera watched her brother's body crumple to the floor, and she felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, not even relief. Just emptiness where 3 years of fear had lived. Then Magnus was there, turning her away from the sight, gathering her into arms that felt like shelter. It's over, he murmured against her hair. It's finally over. She let herself lean into him, let herself believe it was true. The assembly began dispersing, wolves murmuring among themselves about what they'd witnessed. Vera heard fragments, awe at her hidden power, speculation about her future, respect in voices that had held only suspicion hours before. But all she could focus on was the solid warmth of Magnus against her, and the steady pulse of the bond between them, and the knowledge that for the first time in 3 years, tomorrow held no running, only possibility. Night had fallen by the time they reached Magnus's private chambers. Lily slept peacefully in the adjoining room, watched over by the same guard who'd protected her through the tribunal. Vera had held her daughter for a long time after the assembly ended, breathing in her familiar scent, reassuring herself that this fragile creature was truly safe. Now she stood at the window, watching stars emerge through the mountain mist, still wearing the ceremonial gown she'd donned for the tribunal. Behind her, she heard Magnus close the door. You were magnificent today, he said quietly, standing before them all, refusing to break. Using power you'd hidden your entire life to protect yourself when the moment demanded it. Vera turned to face him. He'd removed his formal robes, standing in simple dark clothing that somehow made him look more approachable, more human, more hers. I was terrified, she admitted, every moment of it. But I kept thinking about Lily, about what kind of mother I wanted her to see. Not a woman who ran and hid, but someone who stood her ground. Magnus crossed to her, his movements careful, giving her every opportunity to retreat. And now? What does the woman who conquered her demons want? The bond pulsed between them, warm and insistent, and Vera felt her wolf stir with longing that had nothing to do with fear. You, she breathed. I want you. I want to stop running from everything, including this. His hands came up to cup her face, and she saw them tremble. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the realm, trembling because of her. Vera. His voice cracked on her name. You've been through so much. I don't want to rush you. Don't want to take advantage. You couldn't take advantage if you tried. She turned her face into his palm, pressing a kiss there. I've had 3 years to think about what I want. 3 years to learn what I'm capable of surviving. She met his eyes, letting him see everything. The fear, the hope, the fierce and growing certainty. Mark me, Magnus. Make me yours. Something broke behind his eyes, some last restraint he'd been clinging to, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was everything she'd imagined and nothing like it at all. He kissed her like she was precious, like she might shatter in his arms, and at the same time like he'd been drowning and she was air. His hands tangled in her hair, scattering pins until the elaborate style tumbled down around her shoulders. My mate, he growled against her lips. My impossible, brilliant, beautiful mate. His mouth traced down her jaw, her throat, and she felt the moment his lips found the junction of her neck and shoulder, felt him pause there, his breath hot against her skin. I need to hear you say it, he rasped. I need to know you're certain. I'm certain. She tilted her head, baring her throat in the ancient gesture of trust. Claim me, Magnus. I'm yours. His teeth sank into her flesh. Pain blazed through her, sharp and shocking, and for an instant her whole body seized with the intensity of it. Then the pain transformed, melting into something else entirely, liquid gold flooding through her veins, warmth cascading through every nerve, pleasure so intense it stole her breath. Through the bond, now blazing wide open between them, she felt him. His centuries of loneliness echoing through endless nights. His desperate search, following every rumor, every whisper of a gray-eyed healer. The moment he'd received her letter, how something in his chest had cracked open and refused to close. His fear that he would never find her, that she had died somewhere alone and afraid. His fierce, overwhelming relief when his hunters had carried her unconscious body into his palace. And beneath it all, love. Love so vast and consuming it defied comprehension. Vera gasped as the sensations crashed through her, tears streaming down her cheeks. She'd thought she understood the mate bond, had studied it in her healer's training, but nothing had prepared her for this complete and devastating intimacy. Magnus pulled back, his tongue soothing the mark he'd made, and his eyes blazed pure gold when they met hers. Yours, he breathed. Everything I am, everything I have, yours. Vera reached for him, pulling his head down to her level. She found the junction of his neck and shoulder, felt his muscles lock with anticipation, heard the ragged sound of his breathing. Mine, she whispered against his skin. And then she bit. His groan vibrated through her entire body as her teeth broke skin. She tasted blood. His blood, copper and salt and something uniquely him, and felt the bond between them snap into absolute completion. Now she could feel everything. His heartbeat pounding in sync with her own, his emotions swirling through her consciousness like colors in water. His strength surrounding her like a wall against every danger the world might offer. And his love, so fierce and consuming that it left no room for doubt. She pulled back, and they stared at each other in the aftermath. Both marked, both claimed, both forever changed. My queen, Magnus breathed. My king, she answered. He pulled her against him, and they held each other as the bond settled into something unshakable, a connection that would outlast time itself. Vera pressed her face into his chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the warmth of his arms around her. She had spent 3 years running, 3 years hiding, 3 years convinced that she would never know peace, never know safety, never know love. She'd been wrong about so many things, but she wasn't wrong about this. The coronation took place 3 days later. Vera stood on the balcony overlooking the great courtyard, wearing robes of deep emerald embroidered with silver moons. Her marking bite, still fresh and faintly tender, was visible above the neckline, a deliberate choice, a statement of claim that no one could ignore. Below, wolves from a dozen packs had gathered to witness her elevation. She saw familiar faces among them, healers she'd worked alongside during her years of running, villagers who'd offered her shelter without knowing who she was, traders who'd shared their fires with a woman and her daughter. And standing at the front, supported by attendants but determined to witness this moment himself, stood her father. Alpha Stormborn had aged terribly in 3 years. The poison had ravaged his body, leaving him frail where he'd once been powerful. But his eyes, so like her own, were clear and bright with unshed tears. "I failed you," he'd said the night before, when they'd finally been allowed a private meeting. "I believed lies over my own daughter. I let you run. I let you suffer." His voice had broken. "There is no forgiveness enough for what I did." Vera had taken his hands in hers, feeling the bond of blood that still connected them despite everything. "You believed what you saw," she'd said quietly. "Drake was very convincing. And I was young and frightened, and didn't fight hard enough for the truth." She'd met his eyes. "But that's over now. I choose to move forward. I hope you'll choose the same." He'd wept then, her proud father, and she'd held him while he sobbed 3 years of grief and guilt into her shoulder. Now he stood before the assembled packs, his voice carrying weakly but clearly as he spoke the formal words. "I, Alpha Stormborn of the Northern Territories, bend the knee to Luna Queen Vera of the realm. I pledge my pack's eternal allegiance and acknowledge her rightful sovereignty." The courtyard erupted in howls of acknowledgement. Magnus stood at her side, Lily perched on his shoulders with a crown of wildflowers tangled in her dark hair. The little girl waved enthusiastically at the assembled wolves, completely unbothered by the formality of the occasion. "Luna Queen," Lily announced proudly. "That's my mama." Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Vera felt something loosen in her chest, some last remnant of tension that she hadn't known she was carrying. This was real. This was hers. After the formal ceremony, after the feast and the dancing and the endless parade of nobles offering their congratulations, Vera finally escaped to the balcony attached to the royal chambers. The gardens below blazed with torchlight, and in the soft grass, Lily chased fireflies with the delighted shrieking of any normal 2-year-old. Magnus's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on the top of her head. "How do you feel, Luna Queen?" "Overwhelmed," she admitted. "Happy. Terrified." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "Is this what normal feels like?" "I've forgotten. I don't know if anything about us counts as normal." He kissed her forehead, the gesture impossibly tender. "But I'm looking forward to finding out together." Through the bond, she felt his contentment, vast and settling, like a lake finally gone still after a storm. And beneath it, steady as bedrock, love. "The letter," she said suddenly. "Do you still have it?" "Always." He pulled it from inside his shirt, worn soft with handling, the ink faded in places but still legible. "I thought about framing it, having it preserved properly." "Frame it," she agreed. "Put it where we can see it every day." She traced the familiar handwriting with one finger. Proof that some bonds survive even years of darkness. Magnus pressed a kiss to her marking bite, and she shivered with the sensation, pleasure and belonging and bone-deep rightness. "I love you," he murmured against her skin. "I loved you before I knew your face, before I heard your voice. I read your letter and I knew, somehow I knew, that you were the missing piece of everything." Vera turned in his arms, rising up to kiss him properly. "I love you too," she said. "My king, my mate, my home." Below them, Lily's laughter rang out as she caught a firefly and immediately released it, watching it spiral up toward the stars. The child who'd been born in hiding, who'd learned to walk in strangers' barns, who'd never known what home meant. She stood now in the gardens of a palace, princess and heir to a kingdom, surrounded by people who would die to protect her. And Vera Nightshade, who had spent 3 years running, who had written one desperate letter to a stranger and prayed for salvation, who had faced her demons and spoken truth through sacred fire. She stood on a balcony with her mate's arms around her and watched her daughter chase joy through the twilight. The letter was framed the next morning, hung above their bed where they would see it every day. A reminder of how far they'd come, of how much they'd survived, of the hope that had sustained them both through years of darkness. Some bonds, Vera had learned, were strong enough to survive anything, and some stories, despite all odds, ended in light.